In her new World War II novel, The Golden Doves, author Martha Hall Kelly returns to Ravensbrück, the Nazi concentration camp that inflicted unspeakable horrors on the women who inspired Kelly's first novel, the breakout hit Lilac Girls. Hi, it's Brenda with HEC Books, where we discuss books with the authors who write them. If you're new to our channel, make sure you subscribe for more great content like this. Now, let's meet Martha Hall Kelly to talk about the true events and heroic women behind her new novel, The Golden Doves. Martha Hall Kelly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I know, we're so excited to have you here.
So great to be here.
So this all started with Lilac Girls, but it's wound its way back. Your two books after Lilac Girls sort of went deeper into the history of Caroline Faraday, your heroine of Lilac Girls, to her family and her family history. And now, in this case, you are going forward, back to World War II, but then forward into the next generation almost.
Right. When I was researching Lilac Girls, that book took me 10 years to write, and I went to Ravensbrück twice. I had so many things that I couldn't put in Lilac Girls that I kept kind of squirreling them away for when I wrote another World War II book. And things about Ravensbrück, things about, how Nazis escaped, fugitive Nazis. There was so much that I kind of tucked away to put in this book.
Who are the Golden Doves?
Well, they are, if you look at the cover of the book, there's Arlette, who is half German and half French, and Josie. She's an American, half Jewish. And Josie and her mother and grandmother end up in Paris, occupied Paris, stranded when her father, who's a diplomat, leaves the country and he can't get back in without getting caught by the Gestapo. They're using this little family as the women as kind of bait. And so Josie is stuck in occupied Paris, this American girl, and without telling you too many spoilers, she starts becoming a radio operator, which was really, really dangerous. And
she ends up getting recruited.
She does, yes. She gets recruited. And, it was such a dangerous thing, and so many radio operators, the adult ones, had been kind of picked off by the Gestapo because they were really good at finding them. They had all sorts of technology to track them down. So they turned to a lot of the younger people in Paris. And, kind of by default, Josie ends up being a radio operator. And she meets up with Arlette, this half German, half French girl who grew up in Alsace, which of course is on the border of France and Germany. And in some ways she identifies as German. She was in the BDM, which is the female wing of the Hitler Youth, and she has a baby with a Wehrmacht soldier, and out of wedlock, and has the baby in a Lebensborn home, which is what they did in Nazi Germany. But she eventually ends up with Josie as in Paris as a radio operator, and they became known as the Golden Doves. And they outwit the Gestapo at every turn, and there's a price on their head.
So the story starts with the French resistance, but it takes so many turns from there into the aftermath of the war as well.
Yes. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that they end up at Ravensbrück. I can't say why, because that would be a spoiler, but they do end up there, and sadly, terrible things happen to Josie's mother, and at the hands of a terrible doctor named Dr. Snow. And also, Arlette, her son, is taken at the camp. And so they emerge from Ravensbrück very wounded and with a vendetta of sorts to find this Dr. Snow.
You mentioned, too, that you had this thing you wanted to really go deeper into, and that had to do with the children of the war and the tragedy.
When I went to Ravensbrück, I met several grown adults that had been born at the camp. And I thought that was so interesting. How did they survive? So many of them didn't. And I just thought that was really interesting. There was also a special block where the Nazis allowed women who were pregnant, they arrived at the camp pregnant, and they allowed them to have their babies at the camp because they found that women whose babies were taken away from them became non-productive workers. So they had a selfish motive, but they wanted to do this experiment to see if they could have more productive workers.
One of the really fascinating things about the resistance movement, too, it was a way for women, especially young women, to participate in the resistance against the war. And the courage that you see and the moments and the way that they're tested in your story really shows that.
I loved writing those parts. I was really inspired by the book A Woman of No Importance. It's about Virginia Hall. No relation, sadly, because, she's my hero. But she was a spy for the British, SOE, and she was unbelievable. She was so dedicated, and she only had one leg. I mean, she did it all with, a wooden leg. And she would dress up, and she talk about outwitting the Gestapo. She was unbelievable. And the whole time, she was operating a radio, which was so dangerous.
When the story opens, tell us what Josie is doing and what she's trying to reveal to us about the realities of what happened after.
Well, she's wounded in the same way that Arlette is after losing her son, but Josie has lost her mother, and she feels like was responsible for her mother being at the camp to begin with. And she, day to day, is just a peon and does kind of the grunt work. The book opens when she goes on Fort Bliss to just a house where this German family is staying.
And what's Josie working at now? She's
in Army intelligence, yeah, and just kind of a low-level worker, but she's really, really smart and has been through a lot. And she doesn't kind of take it well that these Germans are there, just kind of, as she says, having barbecue and bourbon by the pool, talking about how handsome Hitler was.
And spell it out for us too. What is going on? In that after the Nuremberg trials, everyone thought, well, everybody got their punishment, right? And justice was served, but that's not what happened.
So not right. Yes. Well,
tell us what really did happen.
It was a chaotic time then. There were so many Nazis, and it was hard for the U.S. government to kind of vet everybody and figure out, who should be punished, who should be in jail. And at that point, they were even letting, Bonn was putting a lot of pressure on the United States to let everybody out of jail. They were making all sorts of deals because the Soviets wanted those scientists really badly.
There was an arms race going on, and suddenly these war criminals became like hot properties.
That's exactly right. Yeah. It's unsavory stuff. Yeah. And now a lot of the CIA classified documents are becoming declassified. So if you go to CIA.gov and you type in any of this, it all comes up. And I use that a lot in my research. So it isn't my opinion, any of this. It's CIA documents. But the Cold War was really ramping up at that point. And the Joint Chiefs under Truman said, do whatever you have to do to get all those German scientists. 1,000 of them came over. And a lot of times, they didn't have that much knowledge to give the program, but they figured better we get them than the Soviets do, just in case. So they brought so many men over and their whole families that really had been complicit in a lot of crimes.
And Josie makes it clear that she's disgusted by all of this, and yet it's the reality of what the world is post-war now.
Absolutely, and it's also a very male-dominated place. She's one of the few women even on the Army base. And when she tries to complain about it, she's poo-pooed. But finally they come to her and say, hey, we actually would like to find Dr. Snow. How about you go out and take a shot at it?
And on the other side of the world, Arlette is trying to rebuild her life, and she ends up unwittingly getting pulled into this crazy situation of the search for this doctor who has not been brought to justice.
Yes. She comes at it through a different way, through her son. And she's in Paris, wounded, and, a lot of charlatans approached people after the war and kind of took advantage of them and said, oh, I can help you find your loved one. And she's been through that. She's lost everything. No, she has no money. And this man comes into the cafe where she works. And that's her little family. They're Ravensbrück survivors. And he comes in and says, I may know where your son is. And she has to make the decision, do I go with him?
Some of these plot lines sound so crazy that they couldn't be true, and yet everything you do is rooted in fact.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know. It really, truth is stranger than fiction. Oh, absolutely, when it comes to this period in time.
You are known for your research, and you dive really deep on all your novels and immerse yourself in the time period and the history and your characters. What was that like for this novel?
Well, it was during COVID.
Oh,
so,
true.
Yeah, I had to rely on places that I'd already been. But then, and I had been to Italy, and a big part of it takes place in Italy, because basically Arlette goes to South America pretty early in the book, and Josie travels around the world looking for this Dr. Snow. Arlette is looking for her son. But while she's traveling, she goes to Germany and to Italy, and what she's doing in Italy is she's tracing the Nazi rat line, and she thinks that Dr. Snow, through, for different reasons, clues along the way, she thinks that Dr. Snow escaped on the rat line, which was from Germany and Austria down over the mountains in northern Italy, and then the Catholic Church arranged for the fugitive Nazis to live in safe houses along the way, monasteries, where they would dress as monks and wait for the next person to help them on their way down the rat line.
You talk about the Nazi rat line throughout the novel, but tell us, what does that mean? What is the rat line?
The rat line is the way that fugitive Nazis made their way across the border down through Italy and made their way to safe havens. And everybody knows that a lot of them went to South America, but they also went to the Middle East, they went to Asia, and they had to wait in Rome oftentimes to get their travel papers and money in order to do it, because it was a really expensive thing. And the Catholic Church helped them. One man in particular named Bishop Udall, and he was called the Brown Bishop, and he was Austrian and hated communism, hated the Soviets, and he did everything he could to help these fugitive Nazis make it out of the country.
You have something that you said about this book that I loved. It's a big story. I think of it as Thelma and Louise meets the Da Vinci Code.
That's so funny.
And as a reader, that was really true.
I forgot. Did you feel like that?
I did.
Oh, good. Well, researching it really felt kind of like that, like tracing the Nazi rat line and everything. That really felt like the Da Vinci Code. But I love Thelma and Louise. It's one of my favorite movies. And I mean, at some point when they meet up together, that is kind of, they don't go off a cliff together.
They do spend some time by cliffs.
They do. They do.
Not to spoil anything.
Yeah, they do. In French Guiana.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That was a tense scene.
Really?
I was like, oh my gosh. Yeah. I have a fear of heights.
I do too.
Yes.
I have the worst fear of heights. So.
Nobody make a move near the cliff.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, there's a lot of tension in this story.
There is. Yes. I like a story. That's what I like to read. I mean, it's once in a while I like a book that doesn't have a lot of, page-turning action to it. But in general, I feel like also I'm competing with Netflix, and nowadays it's not just other books that you're competing with. It's, you can turn on anything. So I try to make it come alive cinematically.
Your characters are rooted in history, But do they ever surprise you as you're developing them?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I really don't like when authors say, oh, they just wrote themselves. That's definitely not true. But once I kind of load them with all of their stuff, all of their qualities and what they look like, I print out pictures of them, and put them into certain circumstances, they definitely do, yeah, surprise me. Like in Lilac Girls, when Kasia mother met Herta Oberhauser. I don't know if you remember back that far, but they have kind of a relationship. They start dancing together, and it's a funny... That all happened, like, I had no idea that was going to happen. And that is the fun part. And definitely that happened, especially in their whole spying world, because... once they started spying, I just, kind of sat back and let them do it.
Research is such a huge part of your process. At what point are you able to say, okay, I've done what I can on that, and now I need to start writing the story? That I always wonder what tells you you're ready to start.
That's a really good question. It's just instinct, and I don't stop once I start writing. I always just think, have I got enough to write what I need right now? Because there's always going to be stuff that comes up that I need to investigate more. But it's really that moment where you say, do I have enough for right now? And because I mean, the whole time I'm writing, up until the very end, I'm still, looking for things. And it's easy to kind of fold things in, and often I'll save it for the next book.
What's the hardest part of the process for you?
Oh, wow. That's such a good question. The actual writing of it?
Just the whole, right.
I think,
a book.
Yeah, I think getting that first draft down is the hardest, because I love to edit. It's, once you have it, playing with it is really, really fun, but creating it is the hard part. Yeah, and I have a really good outline. Now I do. At the beginning with Lilac Girls, I didn't even know I didn't know how to write a book, but I kind of taught myself by reading how to write novel books. And at the beginning, I did not even have an outline, but now I always have an outline, and that helps considerably. Yeah.
That's my next question. Is it started with Lilac Girls, which came out in 2016, but as you said, it started really almost 20 years ago. From your first visit to Caroline Faraday's house. What have you learned about writing and storytelling?
Oh my God, so much.
In that time period.
We would need a couple of hours to go through that. But in a nutshell, everything. I mean, I only wrote the book because I had been researching Caroline Faraday for so long, and I ran into a book editor. My husband and I had dinner with her, and she said, all I need is a chapter. You should write this. And I thought, are you crazy? I'm not a writer. But that kind of stuck with me. And then my husband and I moved to Atlanta for his job at the Weather Channel. And one day I went through the Starbucks drive-thru, and by mistake, the barista gave me a caffeinated decaf cappuccino. And I went home, and the whole thing just started pouring out. And I sent my chapters to this woman, Betty, and she said, great, keep going. And so, it came out in a very, rough form. But I quickly learned that how much I didn't know, how much I had to learn. And so I read every book that I could get my hands on. So I feel like I had great teachers, but I was writing Lilac Girls at the same time that I was learning how to, I would... Betty, my editor, would say, put dialogue in, and I'd say, well, I didn't know Caroline Faraday, and she'd say, it's a novel, make it up. So I'd go to my books or Google, how do you write dialogue? So I feel like I learned kind of on the fly, and sometimes that's the best way to do it. And 4 books later, I feel like I am somewhat better at writing a novel. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Is there anything you would tell your old self?
So
that you
much.
Wish you'd known?
First of all, calm down. It's not, the end of the world if someone says something that you don't like in a review or something. I wish I had known to write in scenes. Because at first, I was writing just narrative summary. And I think a lot of people, when they first write a book, if they haven't, been to school to learn creative writing. And once I figured that out, that you need to write in scenes, that just changed everything for me. Because I really like to make it like a movie. And I feel like if you can make it feel like a movie scene, then, you're halfway home.
That's neat to hear, because that really feels like, whoa, you hit that with Golden Doves, you achieved it, because that's exactly what it felt like to me as a reader.
Oh, good.
That
was the intention. And I love to have almost this invisible little filament, like a spider web, and like pull the reader along through that. So that's what I did with Lilac Girls. I really wanted, I loved that story so much. I wanted to keep the interest of the reader. And so that's what I'm always trying to do.
You talk about that you studied journalism in college and then you went into advertising, and it sounds like such a stretch to write a novel, but actually there's so much seduction that happens in writing, in advertising, and in a novel. At the end of the day, you've got to keep them interested.
No one's ever, and I've always been surprised, no one's ever brought that up before. It's such a good point, because when you are selling a product, it's the same kind of a thing. You have to be all about the person that you are selling a product to. And, you're not really selling with a novel, but it has to be all about them. And I think sometimes writers can be a little bit more about, well, this was what I wanted to say. But I really am always thinking about, do you think the reader will like this? Will this keep people engaged? Is it exciting enough? And I really keep my finger on the pulse, or I try to, when I talk to people at events and, get more information about how they're feeling about the books.
Okay, I want to talk about your fans. You have an army behind you.
They're just the best. I don't know what I did to deserve this, but
I'd love to look at your social media, because every single picture looks like you're at a reunion.
I know. It's really great. I think Lilac Girls just really, struck this chord in people. And every time I go to an event, people they come up to me and they're crying and saying, you don't know what this book did for me. And I'm just always, every time someone says that, I'm just like flabbergasted. Like, how did this happen? It's really, it's the most wonderful thing that's ever happened to me.
And Lilac Girls was an immediate hit, which you said caught you off guard. You did not expect that.
It was. I didn't think anyone was going to read it, honestly. Even when I queried agents and things, I thought, who's going to want to represent me for this? And actually the hardcover was successful, but it wasn't until the paperback that it went crazy. Yeah.
So what's it like now with your fourth novel? Is it like a conversation between you and your fans, in a way?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, what they are always saying is, okay, what's the next one? Because they read it so quickly.
They're hungry.
One person came to an event, and she had already listened to it, and she was one of my first events. And she was saying, so when's the next one coming? I was like, you need to slow down, because I can't keep up with you. But yeah, I'm really, really grateful, because that's like my oxygen, is the people that are so supportive of me that way. It's really nice.
Does that relationship impact your process and your plans?
Oh, definitely.
How
yeah.
so?
Well, they tell me what they want. Yeah. It's really interesting going on book tour, because it's like a giant focus group. I used to be in advertising, and we would, do focus groups on potato chips and cake frosting. And it was really, really helpful. And I feel like these are focus groups, because they tell me. And I'll say, well, here's what I'm working on next. What do you think? And they'll clap and say, yes, yes, yes. It's really interesting. It's like a little incubator.
One of the things that I love about all your books, and that your readers love about your books, is that it doesn't have to end with that story. There are so many resources out there. Your blog is amazing. I can tell that you really enjoy
thank you.
sharing these little tidbits.
I
Tell
do.
us about that.
It's so fun. Once I find out about it, I just want to share it. But yeah, in the books, oh my goodness. I feel like A Woman of No Importance about Virginia Hall is that reads like fiction. Operation Paperclip is so great by Annie Jacobson. That's the definitive work about Operation Paperclip. And, of course, Irene Zisblatt's Fifth Diamond.
Why is it important to you, too, that your readers take this story and then go on to those sources and really learn more?
Well, that's what I like to do when I read a book. I don't want it to just end with that, kind of a closed community. I want it to spark conversations and a dialogue about what happened during the Holocaust.
I feel like there's a theme throughout your work about survival and the human condition. And I feel like we see that in Josie and Arlette. At the end of all of this, they are survivors. And and despite all of the horrifying things that happened to them, it did not break them.
Yes, and that is what I get more people reaching out to me about. Just the idea of hope, that you can survive it and it's going to be okay. And I think I'm trying to tell myself that too. But I met a woman named Irene Zisblatt down on my book tour for Lilac Girls way back in 2016. And she had been operated on, experimented on by Mengele as a 8-year-old girl. Her story is so, so sad.
That's right. That's one of the books that you've talked about, her memoir.
Yes, The Fifth Diamond. Yes, it's so, so good. And I feel like that inspired me with this book because she was a true, she didn't just survive it, she flourished. She came to this country, she had children and grandchildren, and she's so positive. She's in her 90s now. And she's such an inspiration. And that's really what I want to bring to readers is hope that we can get through these kind of things. I mean, it's all happening again today, and I feel like if we know about it, we can. It can be a cautionary tale, and that there's hope.
So, of course, the question you always get: what's next?
Oh my goodness, I love that question because that's what I'm steeped in right now. What's next is what I'm calling right now the last of the Lilac Girls. And it is a novel about Martha's Vineyard during World War II. And there was a lot more going on out there than people realize. My mother's family came to Martha's Vineyard in 1891, the Smiths. And she grew up there and used to tell me that the Army had a base there, and she would watch. They lived on a farm. She was very poor. And they would watch the soldiers go by in these convoys of jeeps, and they were so proud of having them there. And Martha's Vineyard has a lot of cliffs, and what they were doing is they were practicing on the cliffs. They were rappelling in order to practice for D-Day at Normandy. And so she said that they were so sad when they found out that almost 50% of those boys never came home. And I just thought, you know what, my mom's gone now, but I'd love to dig into Martha's Vineyard during World War II. So there were also a lot of U-boats out in the Atlantic around Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, and way more than people realize.
It's so exciting to be able to keep going to these new points in this human story.
Yeah, I always figure if I'm excited about writing it, even after 4 books, then, hopefully that excitement will translate.
So when your readers walk away from reading one of your books, what is it that you do want them to feel? Is it that?
It is that. I think it's hope and positivity because it's a dark subject, but I feel like, and a lot of people with Lilac Girls, they said, oh, I almost put it down. It was so hard to read about the concentration camps. But I think that it honors people that died there and that survived it. And I think to soft pedal it is to do them a disservice. So, yeah, I think that's what I want people to remember is that you can come through it, whatever it is in your life, just like these women did, and give people hope.
Martha Hall Kelly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks again for watching, and please give this video a thumbs up and keep an eye out for our next HEC book interview. To get notified when it comes out, click the subscribe button.